June 1940, an influential section of the British administration advocated for peace with Germany. In September 1940, the RAF was on the verge of defeat, leaving Britain vulnerable to invasion. In October 1941, Russia was on the verge of collapse, with terror gripping Moscow and German forces standing 40 kilometers away. Even if Britain, the United States and Russia had won World War II, Hitler had grand plans for the world if the Axis had defeated the Allies. Hitler's vision would have seen the Reich extending throughout Europe, deep into the Soviet Union, and all the way down into Africa, creating a world known as the New Order. We all wonder at times what the world would have looked like had Hitler won the war. In his book Visions of Victory, historian Gerhard L. Weinberg explores the post-war worlds envisioned by major heads of state. He finds that Franklin D. Roosevelt's vision closely matched the post-World War II world order, but Hitler's vision was more chilling. He believed that the sequel to a successful World War II would be World War III, followed by World War IV, until Germany had conquered the entire globe. Weinberg's work is considered the finest study of World War II. The war was never a sure victory for either side, especially for the UK, which barely held on through the worst of the Blitz. The Soviet Union would become Hitler's second greatest enemy. The Holocaust, a well-known fact, involved the killing of 6 million European Jews as part of the final solution. The genocide ended with the Allied invasions of Germany and Poland at the end of the war. Had Adolf Hitler and the Germans never lost, the program of organized death would likely have continued apace, presumably on track to kill off much more of the Jewish population on the continent. The number of Jews that would have been killed. The Holocaust Encyclopedia, published by the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, puts the total Jewish population of Europe at about 9.5 million. By these figures, another 3.5 million people could have eventually been killed, adding even more souls to the already grim tally. The real figure may have been slightly lower, as the 9.5 million cited included the Jews of the Soviet Union, a few tens of thousands of whom lived in the autonomous Jewish oblast on Russia's Chinese frontier. 9 to 9.5 million people seems like a reasonable and inevitable, if truly bleak, toll. Following the initial victory in Europe, Hitler would have directly annexed the Nordic countries of Denmark, Norway, Sweden and Finland, as well as the German-speaking region of Switzerland. The cruel general government of Poland would have reached as far east as 70 degrees east longitude, little more than half of the entire Russian Empire, and reduced the entire region into a massive pool of expendable slave labour. Japan would then receive the rest of the Soviet Union, temporarily. Hitler would have all the control over the most powerful nations. Mussolini would have been allowed to acquire lands similar to those of the Roman Empire, with the exception that Hitler intended to keep control of France and Britain as a whole, as well as Ireland, and turn Spain and Portugal into satellite states. In sub-Saharan Africa, Hitler had hoped to reclaim the colonies lost by Germany during World War I, and capture the rest from the defeated European powers. He predicted a pro-Nazi South Africa because the Afrikaners were ruthless racists after Hitler's own heart. It goes without saying that the Nazis were intent on killing Jews and other subhumans in whatever place they ruled. He planned to eradicate Christianity. The Nazis also aimed to eradicate Christianity and implement a polygamous state policy so that male survivors of wars predicted to kill 4 million German soldiers could easily impregnate enough German women to prevent a population decrease. It doesn't really look like he was going to regard even his own soldiers as humans. Hitler's plans for the rest of his empire. Hitler clearly considered his main allies, Italy and Japan, as the only useful allies. As a fascist state, Italy might have been allowed to keep its new empire indefinitely, but Japan, after conquering China, the eastern half of the Soviet Union, Southeast Asia, Australasia and the Central Pacific, would eventually be conquered in turn, but only after the destruction of the United States, the last great power free of Axis control. Weinberg discovered only the vaguest German motives for dealing with the final challenge, the abolition of the United States. One key reason for this appears to have been Hitler's continual disregard of the American populace as a race of mongrels, incapable of posing a serious challenge to Aryan military power and liable to fall apart from within at any time. Even as late as the autumn of 1944, Hitler saw the British as his most dangerous foe in the West, despite the fact that by then the US had sent not only the most manpower but also the most tanks, aircraft and artillery to the European theatre of operations. Indeed, by that point, American military aid was supporting every nation fighting the Axis forces. Hitler's obliviousness to this issue demonstrated not just the extent to which racism dominated his worldview, but also his massive ignorance. Hitler's initial European plan effectively aimed for completing the conquest of Western Europe before turning on the Soviet Union, which had maintained its non-aggression treaty with Germany right up until the Nazi invasion of June 1941. If all had gone according to plan, the German army's undivided might would have descended on Russia, and Hitler's vision of a Germany-dominated Europe from Ireland to the Urals would well have come true. However, Hitler's broader grand goal of seizing the rest of the world on the installment plan would have run into a dilemma that Hitler appears to have overlooked. There were things that Hitler might have overlooked. Hitler thought that the Japanese would remain at war with China and the US until he could devour his former friends. Nonetheless, Imperial Japan clearly realised that their alliance with Nazi Germany was only transitory, especially given Nazism's extreme racism. Hitler may have referred to the Japanese as honorary Aryans, but the phrase itself betrays the alliance's ideological awkwardness. And history is filled with alliance reversals in the face of changing circumstances. The Austro-Prussian Bruderkrieg of 1866 gave way in 1879 to the dual alliance of Germany and Austria-Hungary. Italy, the third member of the Central Powers in World War I, actually entered the war on the side of the Allies and would reverse sides in World War II. And 10 years after World War II ended, the United States and West Germany joined the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. As a result, long before Nazi Germany could achieve its ultimate goal of world domination, the rest of the world would have put aside their differences in the face of this evident, huge and unstoppable threat. The consequence would have given the United States, at the very least, footholds in South and East Asia, whereas Germany would have been unlikely to ever obtain the ability to project forces across the wide Atlantic Ocean, let alone the Pacific. The best it could have done was build a fleet of transatlantic bombers, like the fictitious America bomber, which incidentally appears to have been constructed with the intention of a one-way flight, culminating in crashing into New York City skyscrapers rather than a regular bombing run. The US would have retaliated with the highly improbable Convair B-36 Peacemaker, the first intercontinental bomber meant to strike Berlin from bases in northeastern Canada. The B-36 was developed in 1941 when Hitler appeared to be on the verge of conquering all of Europe. The first prototype flew in 1946, and the massive six-engine bomber went into service 2 years later. By 1948, the United States had more than 50 atomic weapons in its arsenal. Given how far behind its nuclear program was, it is exceedingly unlikely that Germany would have developed any nuclear weapons by that time. Under dozens of mushroom-shaped clouds, the mongrel race would have destroyed Hitler's master race. What about Germany? Germany lost its colonies, including those outside Europe, in the Treaty of Versailles, which ended World War I. Hitler aimed to restore German control of these African territories, including Cameroon, Togo, Tanganyika, Burundi and Namibia. He also planned to seize the colonies of defeated European rivals France and Britain. Most of Africa, except for the Italian, Vichy French and Spanish enclaves, would likely be speaking German and flying a swastika banner. The Afrikaans supported the Nazis. The Nazis gained support from South Africa's Afrikaner population, who had historically opposed British rule and had experience in creating and dominating a racial underclass. Some South Africans formed pro-Nazi militias in anticipation of unification with the Third Reich. It's possible that an African managerial caste reporting to Berlin and manned by Afrikaners would have enforced apartheid from the Sahara to Madagascar. One of the strangest plans Nazis had if they won was a giant space mirror. The Nazis had a bizarre plan to place a 1.6 kilometer diameter mirror in orbit 35,900 kilometers above Earth. The mirror was designed to reflect the sun's rays onto the offending party's city, creating a beam of burning hot light that would engulf anything it touched. The Nazis had even planned to set up a full space station and keep a crew of men inside the mirror, surviving on food and oxygen scavenged from a pumpkin crop. Although there are doubts about the success of the plan, Hermann Oberth, the scientist behind the mirror, was so confident in the idea that he tried to get the Americans to build it after the war. Had he had more time, who knows, the Nazis might have completed their space mirror and had everyone else live under the terror of a gigantic death mirror in the sky. What are your thoughts about this post-war world if Hitler had ended up with a victory? Or if he didn't kill himself and decided to empower himself until he could go to war again? There are countless possibilities about such a situation that never happened, but we'd like to know your perspective on if it could have and what it would have looked like in the comments below. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so we can bring you more details on history and future with just one click.